SDLT. This was the major revamp in the autumn statement. I'm sure everyone's familiar with it. This is the non-residential, the commercial, no change to that rate, maximum rate of 5%. The big change, of course, was on residential properties, where we now have a progressive tax, I think that's what you would call it, where rather than having one rate which applies across the entire consideration you pay, as you go up through the bands, you simply pay the additional tax in each band. So we now have a 12% band and a 10% band and a 5% band instead of what we had before, which I think was up to 7%. So I didn't bother working out what the break-even was because I have a more interesting life than that. At least I hope I do. But clearly, when properties are just over the £1 million mark, it's becoming more expensive to move. ATED, annual tax on enveloped dwellings, is now becoming more and more in point. What this basically applies to is residential property inside a company or a trust or some vehicle, in other words, not owned by individuals. And it affects stamp duty, land tax, capital gains tax, and there is an annual tax on the property, which we'll have a look at in a moment because it's quite severe. It doesn't apply if you're a trader, so it's a major, so if you're a property developer or something, it doesn't apply. Basically, it only applies where you have a property in a company and you or somebody connected with you occupies it in some way, shape or form, even if for full rent. That's when it bites, and it can be quite vicious. So what it does is it puts up the stamp duty rate to 15% flat, okay, from property worth over £500,000. So if you were to buy, while you do this now, you wouldn't do it. If you were to buy, for example, into a company, a house for your elderly mother, and it costs just over £500,000, you're paying 15% stamp duty on that rather than the ordinary rates. You just wouldn't do it. I mean, clearly you just wouldn't do it, but and you'd find some other way of getting the money out of your corporate structure in order to do that, to avoid paying this tax. But that's what it means, in effect. This is what the annual charge looks like. Okay, if you are subject to ATED, you have this penal tax. It's like a form of mansion tax, if you like. And you can see it's, it's not insignificant. It's something below 7%. Between 3.5% and 7%. And, it's a fairly decent amount of money. Even if you own a house of, £20 million, to pay £218,000 as a one-off tax to the government is a reasonable amount of money. It makes rates look a bit silly, doesn't it? Because you're probably paying about, well, in Westminster, you're probably paying £500 a year rates or something. But you're paying £218,000 in this one-off charge, one-off annual charge to the government. So it's a large amount of money. You'll notice that for the next year it starts at £1 million, but from the year after it will start at £500,000, and the rate is 3.5% is what they've announced. It'll probably go up by inflation because they said it will go up by inflation. But so for even the £500,000 property, you're going to be paying this annual charge. And of course, any company, I didn't put it on the slides, but any company that's subject to ATED pays capital gains tax on the property which is subject to the charge. The reason I say that, of course, is because a lot of the companies that are within the charge to ATED are overseas companies, and they generally are without the charge to tax in the UK on capital assets. So they are caught, just as individuals are now caught, offshore companies are now caught on these kind of properties.